First of all, I would also like to say thank you very much to Leigh for inviting me to share my story and my experience with all of you here, and for also continuous creating awareness of the protection, better protection for pregnant women in this age of COVID. And I'm also privileged to be speaking and pleased to be speaking after these great speakers, Maria, Harriet, and Jocelyn. Yes. I'm really pleased to be speaking after you, heroes, making sure that you make this whole society a better place for all of us to live in. And yeah, I'm pleased. Thank you very much. Fortunately, everything they have said, they've just given us, all of us, their statistics and the data for what has been going on. And I happen to be a living testimony, and I have a first-hand experience to almost everything that they have said. And my experience, it's a very tragic one, which has really affected my life and that of my children. Okay. Today also happens to be a Remembrance Day for the British soldiers who died in Afghanistan. That's 2 decades ago. And as at yesterday, over 137,000 beautiful lives have been lost to COVID. So if you don't mind, I would humbly request that we just spend just a minute in silence to honor these lives that have been lost. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Who Mary was. It's the first slide, but I tend to, if I was a queen and I had command over the English language, I would probably want to put it, who Mary is. Though she's gone, she's dead and gone, but she still remains in our heart, and it's a difficult place when you lose such a soulmate and a beautiful person whom you've planned your entire life around to just exit this world out of the blue in such a short notice. Mary was a senior nurse at the Luton and Dunstable Hospital. She was also a mother, a wife. She was a daughter. She was a sister and also a friend to so many people. And she was a blessing to so many lives that she came across. Mary was anemic throughout her pregnancy, and she was having regular blood tests to check her hemoglobin levels. She was in her 3rd trimester in her pregnancy when the pandemic struck the entire world. But she continued to work in her ward as a nurse until she was suddenly signed off for maternity leave when her condition had really gotten worse. While signed off work, she continued to attend her antenatal appointments, and like Maria said, without her partner. And those days were not very good days for her. She really struggled through those periods. On the early hours of 5th April 2020, Mary collapsed at home, and I had to call the ambulance to come for her. She was admitted at the A&E department where she was assessed and was diagnosed with a suspected COVID-19 symptoms, but she was discharged the same day home. And on a further assessment, her condition deteriorated and had to call in the ambulance service again on the later part of the 6th of April 2020, where she went in and she was officially admitted into the labor ward. A decision was also made to deliver the baby by caesarean section. Unfortunately, Mary gave birth through caesarean section to a lovely, healthy baby girl, which I decided to name her after her mom, because of all the difficulty experiences she had to go through. And I would also like to reiterate what Maria said. She still went through the same process without her partner. And that was a very big setback for her in such a difficult situation. However, Mary's condition did not improve. So she was showing signs of severe COVID-19 pneumonia. Following a clinical deterioration, she was intubated and admitted into the intensive care unit. Her condition deteriorated further, and after a few days, 5 days later, on the 12th, I received a phone call in the early part of the morning that my wife was clinically dead. Campaign for better protection for pregnant women. Following the tragic and unfortunate loss of Mary, I have become an advocate and a campaigner myself, something that it was never part of me. I was an accountant sitting in the office, recording transactions. But looking at what has happened to my family and the experiences that I was going through, and my case to have to be a single parent to a father, to a dad who didn't know anything about childbirth, was a very, very dark moment for me. So I decided to campaign for better protection for pregnant women during the COVID-19 pandemic, just to make sure that other families do not have to go through the same trauma and mentally drained situations that I have found myself in. In October 2020, a research was done by a campaign group, Pregnant and Screwed, which collected data from almost 17,000 pregnant women in the UK. Out of the 17,000, 3,623 were pregnant, which reveals that 57% of these pregnant women working outside home said they did not feel safe at work, while 52% of these same pregnant women could not socially distance themselves from other colleagues at work, as per what the government guidelines were saying during those days. Over 33% of these women had not also had any risk assessment, despite that these risk assessments were backed by legal requirements. And most of the employers were just overlooking these requirements and putting in place better protection for these women who really needed our support at this time. Out of these statistics, 4% of these pregnant women also only had been suspended from work following risk assessment, which was actually backed by statute law, and it's what was deemed to be the best practice. and what was supposed to be done for all these pregnant women, but not most of them were not fortunate enough to have this privilege to be suspended from work on full pay. So I started a campaign, I started a petition online and urging the government to encourage women to either work from home once they were 28 weeks into their gestation, or be suspended on full pay, as was required by the law of England and Wales. Government spokesperson also responded to this petition, who was urging employers to provide flexible working and home working arrangements for their employees, for expectant mothers who were from 28 weeks of gestation, and we all know that these things were not happening. In 2021, 19th of July to be specific, I had a meeting with Nadine Dorries, who happened to be the Secretary of State for Department of Health and Social Care by then. I made a very convincing proposal to her after hours of discussion that every Black, Asian, and ethnic minority heritage or pregnant women are supposed to be deemed high risk during their pregnancy unless it was critically proven by the doctors that such an individual is not a high-risk person, of which she agreed that was the best way forward and promised to see it through. Since the statistics in that came out were all showing the disparities we have in the care of Black, Asian, and ethnic minorities, it was the best way forward. But if that has been done, I think it's a topic for discussion on another day. Okay. Following the campaigns, the death, and everything, an inquest into Mary's death was opened on the 23rd of March, 2021, a year after the first lockdown, which concluded on the 30th of March, 2021. The coroner who sat on the inquest concluded that Mary died after contracting COVID-19, but it remained unclear where and when the exposure to the virus had occurred, as she did not have any expert evidence. The coroner also urged the government to hold a full public inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic as soon as possible, as it was beyond the coroner's scope. And I quote what she said: "Since this is a process which goes far beyond a coroner's inquest, and the Prime Minister has indicated his intention to hold a full public inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic, I urge him to proceed with this as soon as practicable." I welcome the coroner's comments and the news that the Prime Minister has finally committed to an independent inquiry into the UK's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Over 137,000 souls have been lost only in this country, and still counting. The UK has not experienced an isolated crisis, which is COVID-19, has affected every country in the world. Yet the outcomes of the pandemic have varied significantly between countries. Some have handled the situation quite well, but unfortunately it looks like UK hasn't managed as well as it's supposed to. And I believe as a society it is important that we learn from all the lives that have been lost as a result of this terrible pandemic, and a public inquiry is the right way to address a tragedy of this scale. Thank you very much.